Welcome to Recruiting is No Joke. I am your host, Joel Lalgee. Super excited today, as always, guys. We have a lot of news. We got news on the world of recruitment, hiring, AI, everything that you could think of. And I also have another fantastic guest. So super excited to welcome Daniel Odegaard to the show. Hopefully I said his last name right, although we'll let him pronounce his last name first as well. And as someone who has a really hard to say last name, myself, I totally relate to that. So Daniel, welcome to the show. Why don't you give us, for anyone out there who's not familiar with you,
Sure.
Why don't you give us a Twitter bio, who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into today's conversation.
Sure. So thanks so much, Joel. Really appreciate it. My name is Daniel Odegaard. I work in talent acquisition. Currently, I lead talent acquisition for a company called TripleTen. It's an IT bootcamp that focuses on helping average, normal, everyday people make the transition from their current career to a career in the tech space. But as far as my LinkedIn profile goes, if you find me there, you'll find some very honest things, such as being a poor runner and being a black coffee snob. But ultimately, I love I love all things related to talent acquisition, helping people find their careers and really find meaningful work, and what uniquely makes them, how they're wired, using their giftings, and finding the spots that make the most sense for them and help them fulfill their long-term goals and dreams.
I love that. So how long have you been in talent acquisition for?
Oh, let's see. My first job, I think, was in 2013, I think, in the recruiting space. My first job in recruiting was with Robert Half, the global staffing technology company. And I really only got that job because I studied economics and business in college as a double major. And the first job I took right out of school was doing door-to-door sales residentially around the Baltimore County area, selling Verizon Fios, TV, internet, phone packages, going door to door to all the neighborhoods. With that was my first job out of college. 100%.
What year did you graduate in?
2013.
Okay, cool.
So
wow.
did that for about 9 months. 100% commission work.
Wow.
I did that. Yeah, did that for about 9 months, and I decided, you know what, this isn't really working out beyond just barely making it, week to week. I should probably go find a job that's related to what I actually went to school for.
Yeah.
And so I interviewed for a junior financial analyst role through the Robert Half Account Temps team, which is their temporary accounting and finance team that fills roles there. And the recruiter there, who ran that team, Brian, I think he's the head of talent acquisition now out at Tenable. I think Tenable Network Security. Haven't talked to him in a few years.
Shout out to Brian.
Shout out to Brian, my first manager in the space. But he was familiar with the company that I did the door-to-door sales work in. He was like, dude, if you're willing to work that hard for 9 months on commission, you should come into the recruiting side of the house, and I can put you to work and you can make a lot more money with that. So the make a ton more money part didn't fully come together within the staffing space. And this is kind of part of what led to my revelation of what I'm good at and how I'm wired. Is that I'm much more wired to help people directly reach their goals and dreams and what they want to do. Whereas in the staffing world, you're working at the behest of the client and what the client needs. And there's a mismatch there in terms of my personal values, how I think, how I'm wired versus how that industry and that space works. So it was my first start in recruiting was with them, learned a ton of things. And then from there, I went to a small boutique search agency in the Baltimore, DC area that specialized in accounting and finance roles. And I was there for the next about 3 years or so before moving into the corporate talent acquisition side.
Did you know right away, or did you get a sense pretty quickly that, hey, agency might not be for me, talent is, and there's this whole world of obviously internal talent acquisition, like that's where I'm destined to be?
I didn't really fully realize that until after I had made the jump into corporate. It took me a couple of years working on the agency side for me to really fully understand, okay, how you really make money in the agency world is primarily through client development and bringing in your own clients.
Yeah.
And very much secondary to that is your relationship with candidates. And what I figured out later is that just for how I'm wired as a person, I'm much better at the candidate side than I am at the client development side. Now, I was also, pretty early in my career at that point, is in my early mid-20s at that point. That could be a different story now if I was to going back into it now. At least I would have a lot more greater perspective on how the incentives actually work in that space, in that game, and what leads to you being really successful there long term. But it's just not. I figured out that was just not how I was wired. I was more wired for the candidate side, candidate development, and being able to use my sales skills to bring them to an organization. So I didn't fully realize that, Joel, until after I'd made the jump. But then after I'd been on the corporate side for a year or two, I realized, oh, this is why I'm really good at this side of this, and why I wasn't so great on the agency side.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Robert Half, I mean, I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with Robert Half, even if they're not in recruitment, because obviously they're just a really well-known recruitment agency. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because you still a people person because you're in the recruiting space. But my advice to candidates who are on the job market to figure out kind of who the recruiter serves is to look at where's the money coming from. And just in general, if you want to know who the boss of somebody is, just look at who's paying them, and that'll tell you everything. That'll tell you who they're looking out for. But with that being said, obviously in recruiting, you still care about people, right? But it's such a fine balance. Like I did a post yesterday that was kind of unrelated, but basically just saying, if you value people's time, you should pay for it. It's kind of just in reference to when people are like, hey, I want to pick your brain. It's like, okay, well, do you value what I got to say? Are you willing to put a dollar amount behind it? And one of the questions was from a recruiting leader. And they said, do you think candidates should have to pay for a recruiter's time? And I said, well, depends. If it's to fill an open role that they're working on, definitely not. But if they're genuinely like, hey, I want you to spend an hour with me and do some sort of resume rewrite or review or some kind of strategy session, I'm like, why not? And as a recruiter, I mean, if you're going to make a lot more money from filling positions, taking money from companies than you would taking money from candidates, hopefully. But it's one of those things, right? And then you have the whole, like if I say to you, a recruiter's job is to help people find jobs, like what's your kind of reaction to that? Like what's your thought around that?
I mean, it depends on the business model that we're talking about. There are recruiters out there that are more candidate focused and operate more as job search coaches, and do help them in that way. That is a valid business
reverse
model.
Recruiting, I think they call it.
Reverse recruiting. That there is a valid business model there where a lot of good things can happen. That's a misconception, I think, of the industry as a whole. Because again, getting back to your thought process of like, how do the incentives actually align here, and where does the money come from with that? So, and I think some of this could also depend on if you're working like with a national search firm, let's say like a Robert Half, a Michael Page,
Aerotech,
one of those. That should be an expected service if you're a candidate for the full suite of services for what they do and how they're compensated by their customers. That should be packaged into your experience with them as a candidate. I could be convinced that if you're working with a small, like 3-4 person operation, that's a small search firm, and you really just want help working with your resume and some coaching on job searching, that yes, I could see a reasonable approach to charge for those services. I know there's people out there that do that. I think somebody whose content that I follow, Sarah Johnston, on LinkedIn, follow
the
her.
briefcase coach. Shout out to Sarah.
She puts out really good content. Her work is obviously more focused on executives, in a more niche case there, but there's a good business model to be had there where you really can help people, but you should also expect to pay someone who has that experience that can make a tremendous difference in your job search. That there's value there to be had, and that should be worth something to you.
Yeah, and just to give context here too, I charge for an hour to do like a resume review. So not even a resume rewrite, but like a review guide, and then job search strategy session, which I call it. I charge $300 for an hour. Now the caveat there is, it's not my full-time thing. I'm definitely not doing 40 hours of that. I probably book between 5 to 10, but I always tell people in the actual booking link, it says, I cannot guarantee you a job. I'm not guaranteeing you a job. If that's what you're thinking, I'm not a reverse recruiter. And one of the things that's interesting, at first I was like, why would someone pay that amount of money? But a lot of the times with that session, it is just figuring out what somebody even wants to do in the next step. I get a lot of people who have been laid off after 15, 20 years. And some of them even, they kind of even become almost, hate to say it, like almost like a therapy session in terms of, I wouldn't say therapy, but just coaching on like how to approach, how to think, how to approach the job search. And then we get into some of the strategy. And I look at it and go, look, $300, it's expensive enough to where my calendar is obviously not going to be taken up for 40 hours.
Yep.
But I've also found that the people who pay the money, they end up getting results because there is also something to be said about free advice versus paying for it. So I don't want to go too much down this tangent, but I do actually want to kind of transition to the work that you're doing at TripleTen. TripleTen, right? I got that right.
Yep,
okay, good.
correct.
I think some reason in my head I was like AAA. I'm like, that's a whole different business. But TripleTen. So I want to just focus on this for a couple minutes because I get a lot of questions around boot camps and certifications and people wanting to transition into tech. And we'll cover this before we get into the news. But number one, the first question I would have is, are you seeing a transition now with kind of where the market is in terms of like the effectiveness of even trying to transition into tech? And like, what advice would you have for people in that way? And then what are some of the things that they would want to look for? And it's totally fine if you, pitch TripleTen here as well. But like, what are things that people need to want to look for? Because you come from a unique angle in terms of talent acquisition and being involved in a boot camp, right? So thoughts on that?
Yeah. So let me throw out the usual caveat and say that I'm extremely biased about our company and incredibly bullish on what we do. So
link is in the show notes.
So let's throw that out there. But I think first off, same as whether if you're looking at tech or not, same thing for anyone's job search is that you need to think about what is it that you actually want to do, and then figure out what's the pathway to get there.
I love that.
If your goal is to become a software engineer for one of the big tech companies out there, we used to call it FANG. I don't remember what.
Mang.
I don't remember.
Now it's Mang.
I was gonna say I forgot what we call it now. And your goal is to work with one of the goals to get into with one of those organizations. You need to understand that is a very tiny percentage of people who will actually get into those organizations relative to the hundreds of thousands of people who are, or millions of people potentially that are trying to get in for these similar types of roles.
Do you know offhand how many applications some of these big tech companies get? What would be a guess?
It's got to be an enormous load.
Yeah. Okay.
It's got to be enormous. Like I don't want to I don't want to depress people too much by making an educated guess there, but it's a lot. I'll use a comparison for one of my open roles here, on a much smaller micro level. When I post a role for my organization that's a full-time position, let's say it's a full-time employee role in the U.S., it's a full remote job. When I post it, I'll have 500 applications before 36 hours. Now that's just my organization. We're still not full, super well known in the U.S. market yet.
Just to give people an idea too, like how many employees, give us some scope of the work you're doing.
2024, we hired 806 people globally, across the world. Our full-time headcount's around 700 or so. And then we have another 400 to 500 or so part-time people that are more related to our student operations side. Cool. Tutors, instructors, success coaches, those kinds of things. There's a variety of those roles. Some of those are full-time, some of those are part-time, and levels of that ebb and flow a little bit throughout the year, depending on our, the size of our student body with that. For one of these types of roles, within 36 hours, I'll have more than 500 applications for one of these roles. Now, I can only just imagine if I'm offering a position with Google or with Meta, no matter how you feel about those organizations, you could probably X that by probably minimum 10. And that's probably a very conservative number for that. So thinking back to this idea, like what is your actual goal of what you're trying to do? Are you trying to become a software engineer in big tech? or is your goal to change careers, become a software engineer, for a good company, and we'll figure out the rest later and what that means. Maybe that involves you going into a career with big tech later on down the road. Maybe that means you move into a front end developer role with, say, like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, getting 3-4 years of really good corporate experience there, and moving into other kinds of roles. And when most people think of tech, and when we use the word tech, our minds go to the big companies that dominate all the headlines.
Yeah.
What people forget about is that actually big tech represents actually a very small percentage of the overall jobs in the tech market as a whole, and also its share of hiring and available jobs as a whole. It's actually a very small percentage. We're talking about the full workforce across the US market. And so if your goal is to go into one of these big tech organizations and all the benefits that's there, recognize and know that's going to be incredibly difficult, even if you have all the professional background and experience to do that. If you're not experienced in the space, even if you have it, that's still going to be a very difficult process. If your goal is a little bit more approachable, like, hey, I want to make this transition and going from being, I don't know, the head of like the lead person for the baseball department at like Dick's Sporting Goods or something like that. Let's say you run like the sports equipment side there, you're the department manager there. It's very approachable to go from that to being a quality assurance engineer, or to become a software engineer long term and moving into that career long term. But you need to have manage your expectations and think about, okay, this is what I'm trying to do long term.
It's great.
This is going to take some time and effort to do this. So is it approachable? Yes. You do not need to have a genius IQ to do these roles. These are complex careers. That's why they're always in demand. But the average person can learn to do this and be successful in it. A trick, though, is managing your expectations of, hey, what is this? What does this mean for me long term? What is my goal? What am I actually trying to do? And what does that mean? Maybe that means long term. You'll be one of those people that gets into Google from the outset of after doing a boot camp or after doing some internships. Maybe that will be you. I don't know that. You don't know that. None of us can predict the future on this, but that's where you need to be clear about, okay, what is my actual goal? What am I trying to do? Okay, now how do I go out and make that, make this goal happen?
Look, I think that's the advice that I would say nobody wants to hear, but it's definitely the advice that does not go viral, unfortunately, on social media. And I was going to ask you, like, just from like a marketing standpoint,
yeah,
because I'm obviously involved heavily on social media, on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, all this stuff. And because of that, I see a lot of content because I'm constantly looking at who's creating what and who's doing what. One of the things I have noticed with boot camps is sometimes there is an unrealistic expectation of what they're going to deliver. So I guess with what you said, like, how does that come into play with like the way that your company does marketing, or does it impact it? Like, and how important is it to, as a consumer, so someone who's making a decision, is it a red flag if like unrealistic promises are even being made? Like, what's your thought with that?
I think, Joel, it's like anything else that people do homework into buying. Whether if you want to buy a trampoline, or if you want to buy a car, you'll do research reviews on what's the reliability of this car. There's brands out there that are well renowned for their reliability, regardless of almost regardless of what they make. Like Toyota, for example, almost everything they make is long term reliable. And yes, you'll pay a lot of money for your Toyota, but that thing's going to last a long time if you do all the things you're supposed to with it. So I think it's like anything else where you need to do your research on it and think about, okay, what are the promises being made here? What is realistic about this based on what I know from the space, and dissect it that way. And thinking about the marketing, thinking about the promises being made, and again thinking back to, okay, what's my goal? What is this company's incentives, and what are they trying to do? For what we do on the TripleTen side, we're very transparent about how, hey, most of the folks who do our programs are coming from non-tech backgrounds. And so our programs are geared for people who are not from a tech background. And so there's a reason that's, our programs are asynchronous. It does require, a certain amount of time for people to stay up on the homework and required work of them per week. And so you need to dive into, okay, based on how a program is set up and what the marketing says, how much of a time commitment is this for me to be successful in this program? Is that something that I can actually do? Is this something that I can set up to be a regular part of my life for a significant period of time?
Yeah.
Some people can dive into a boot camp and get on a full-time basis and get it done over 3 to 4 months, depending on the complexity of the program. For other people who are already working a full-time job and they have bills and families to support and things like that, that's not realistic for some people. For those people, they need more of a graduated approach where on a week over week basis for, a 4, 6, 9 month program, where they do it over time. And there's other programs like TripleTens that take more of this graduated approach. I'm not going to sit here and say we're the only company that does great work in this space. I wouldn't imply that at all. There's different options out there for people depending on their situation and what, again, coming back to what is it that they're looking to do and accomplish and what are their goals are. For a lot of people, our program works really, really well, particularly for people coming from non-tech backgrounds.
Yeah.
That makes us a good fit for a lot of people, but there's also other programs out there too that do a really solid job of this space. So again, being really honest with yourself, what is my situation? What is a hope and a dream versus what is something that I can break down into goals and actually do realistically given that person's life situation?
Yeah, I love that, and it's. I think the part too about this. I mean, it really is just like a misnomer about like tech and what does tech represent? Because I see the same thing, right? I do these job search chats and people are coming in. They're like, I want to get in tech, and I'm like, okay, well, an IT job is still tech, right? It's still under the same thing. And somebody's having a graduated strategy. Somebody's taking a step back from where you're at. And I think ultimately it is being able to set that goal and go, okay, where do I want to be in 3 years? Where do I want to be in 5 years? What's like the quote unquote dream job? But then also I think right now, I mean, guys, like if you got to read the news as well, like Meta just laid off 3,000 people. So, sometimes I'm just like, you got to think about these things. Like you could spend decades trying to get into a company, and then that company, that you get into lays you off. Or there's just so many things that can happen, and not everything is linear and goes by plan.
Yeah,
I'm curious from your perspective. Obviously, I talk a lot about how right now I really do think like the job market is a challenge, especially for corporate jobs. Yes. And I know people debate me and they pull out graphs and charts, and I'm just going by what I see from talking to people, smart people, really qualified people. What's your overall optimism around like just the tech hiring market in general? Like if you were to kind of give a thought around like it's like 3 to 5 years, is it still a good field to get into and make that transition?
So I'm going to separate big tech from tech in terms of this discussion. I'm going to separate that. The tech industry as a whole, which would include big tech, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, I would go beyond that and say 15 to 20 years is only going to continue to accelerate in growth. You think about if you just open your phone and think about the apps that you've added to your phone in the last year.
Yeah.
Is that 10? I think maybe things that you didn't have before, or if you back it up, think about how many apps that you add to your phone from companies that maybe didn't exist, 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe that have grown over time. Yeah. Think about all the day-to-day things in your life that are becoming more and more and more tech-centric just for your everyday life.
Yeah.
The link that was sent to set up this call was sent via a particular tool.
Shout out Riverside.
Shout out Riverside. And just think about it that way. What areas of your life are not going to continue to be affected by tech over the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah.
It's not many. Now let's think about this if we think about it from a big tech perspective. There's going to be big and boom bust cycles depending on what those organizations and companies are working on, what they're doing within their own mergers and acquisitions process, divestitures process. That's going to yo-yo and go up and down. I saw an article recently, and I for the life of me, Joel, I can't remember where I read this recently. It was something on LinkedIn, I think, that talked about the average tenure for someone in big tech was roughly 3.5 years or less.
Yeah.
From my perspective, people need to lose the idea of what's your dream job, because unless you've had your dream job before, you actually really don't know what the reality is of what your dream job is going to actually look like day to day. And I know people that have worked at Amazon, and that was the most stressful period of their life. with how things were done. I know of other people that look back on it as the best time in their career because of the other sharp, smart, talented people that they were around every single day and the work that they got to do. So it could be the former, could be the latter. You don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you could end up with an amazing manager that supports you, that's a mentor, that's going to help you, or you could end up with a manager that micromanages you and like treats you poorly. You're not in control of that.
So I'm incredibly bullish on the tech industry long term. And again, caveat for what I do and what my company exists to do. Caveat to that, I don't want to mislead anybody here with that, but I'm incredibly bullish long term. But in particular, what it means for the non-big tech world, where the startup companies are, where the industries that are rapidly evolving, and what those small organizations are doing. If you think about, I don't know if you follow Cody Sanchez at all on LinkedIn. Or some of her content. And what I really think is interesting about how she talks about all the big changes that are happening for mom and pop shops across the country, regardless of industry. Many of those are becoming very tech forward and very tech centric. And moving forward. So industry as a whole, I think we should be incredibly bullish on what the long-term opportunities are. That doesn't mean that there won't be some challenges in what we think about what a software engineer does today versus 2 years from now or 5 years from now may not be the same thing. Like I think a lot about, I got two boys at home, and I think about the long term for them for college. And I'm like, well, college may not really exist in a form that I know today. So what is it that I can do for them and teach them that will be transferable regardless of what technology does? That's things like how to be kind, how to be empathetic, and how to be good at persuasion and sales, because those things will translate across whatever job that they want to do long term, whatever industry they want to do long term. And so people need to think about that with the skills and jobs and what they want to move into, whether if they want to wholesale change careers or if they want to somewhat guard against what their role might be if they're afraid of being replaced by AI. They need to think about, okay, well, how can I change what I do now to be something that produces value that's not easily replicable by an AI bot? Is my role mostly task-oriented work? Or does it require original thought to be successful day to day with that? And so that's not quite answered your question, but that's how I would think about, yes, I'm incredibly bullish on the tech industry long term. With that. That doesn't mean there won't be significant changes within that, with how we think about what a software engineer does today versus maybe 5 years from now. A lot of people are on this doom and gloom train of how AI is going to fully replace what junior engineers do. Yes and no. If we think about junior engineers as now, I'm not an IT recruiter. I've never had a strong background in that space. But if we make this analogy of if what junior software engineers do now is mostly the task-based work equivalent of the engineering space, if that's being replaced by AI, there's still going to be a need for junior engineers to then become mid-level and senior engineers long term. The path that they get there, though, might look very different from what we think about today, with those things. And that's how people need to think about, at least from my perspective, people need to think about how is the tech industry going to change long term. Because our lives are not going to suddenly become less and less tech dependent moving forward. If anything, it's probably going to become more and more so. Arguably, I think that can mean really good things. That's a whole nother discussion in terms of what it means from a sociological and ethical perspective and all kinds of stuff that's beyond the scope of this conversation today. But if we think about that, we should think about it being incredibly bullish, but that doesn't mean what we think about these things today will be true 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And what a junior engineer does, what a quality assurance person does, and all those kinds of things.
Look, I think the skill, because you mentioned some great skills there. I mean, I think mindset as well is huge, right? Like I think having an adaptable mindset is huge, and I think people that are adaptable, that can deal with change, that are not change averse and wanting just to do the same thing over and over or do things how they've always done it, having that mindset is crucial. And and then I think of another one. It's like problem solving. Like problem solving is something that's needed in tech. It's needed in engineering. It's needed in sales. It's needed in everything. Like the ability to not just go, oh, there's a problem, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm just going to leave it, but to approach a problem. And I found this a lot, even in just doing like projects around the house. Like my father-in-law, he's got a mindset, and it's just called get past the problem. And the biggest thing I learned from that is sometimes like you just have to figure out a way, and even if it's not perfect, it's like there are ways to get around the problem. And when it came to working on the house, like I would be like freaked out, like, oh, I'm gonna do something, the house is gonna fall down. More time has gone by, I'm like, oh, like if you just think logically, these two things just need to come together. Great, I'm gonna screw them together. There wasn't a pre-drilled hole, there wasn't really a rule book, but it worked, looked great, and it did the job. And I think one of the things in our society as time has gone by is we're so quick to Google the answer, like just try and figure everything out perfectly instead of just looking at it and going, oh, it looks like it needs this. And I think in business, it's the same thing. It's that how good are you at, oh, we got a problem and there's no playbook. Can I adapt? Can I figure out solutions? But I want to just transition here. So
sure.
You were talking about AI replacing humans, and we're going to just follow. This is like a two-parter, and I know we covered this a little bit last week, but this was an article from about February 3rd, so it's about 3.5 weeks ago. And this guy right here, this is Klarna CEO. We talked about it last week a little bit, so you guys kind of know what has happened. But this article is 3 weeks ago. It says, Klarna CEO warns AI is already capable of doing any human job, and his company is already living it. Well, as a development to this story, we also then saw, I think it was about a week ago, and we were both talking about this beforehand, like it's actually kind of hard to find articles on this. Wonder why, because there's so much freaking money going into AI right now. But this article came out, and again, it hasn't been widespread news. I did a post about it on LinkedIn, but this was the article that I talked about. It says, Klarna chatbot strategy shift. Why companies are rebalancing human and AI customer service. So give us like the snapshot here. I kind of covered the headlines, but what happened here?
Well, I think what we're seeing, and again, this is very surfacey level, what we're able to see, not being part of the organization, not seeing behind the curtain.
Yeah.
But I think what we're seeing is a shift back to human beings are fundamentally irrational. Regardless of where you may be on the religious scale, regardless of where you may be on how you think about philosophy and things like that, across the board, human beings are fundamentally irrational in our thought process, our emotions, and our decision making and our decision making behavior.
Yeah.
And so I think what they likely found is that by outsourcing it to AI that's not capable of dealing with someone who's having a rough day, being able to come with a warm, empathetic presence to someone who's having a rough day, using whether if it's actually about their service or not. And I'm guessing the switch is coming back from a lot of negative feedback from their client base. That's causing this.
They say in the article there's just two reasons. Okay. So if we look, there was
that's just my guess. But yeah, you want to cover that?
Yeah, one reality was customers still want human support options. So they appreciated the convenience and speed of AI chatbots for simple inquiries, but became frustrated when these systems couldn't resolve complex issues. And like you say, though, I think a lot of that is like the empathy, right? And then the second thing was the quality assurance. So, obviously you hire a bunch, you get rid of customer service. Now you got to hire quality assurance. What's harder to hire, customer service or quality assurance?
I think it's got to be harder to hire the quality assurance people, especially at volume. Especially at volume with the size of company that Klarna is, and they've been a tremendously successful company, so they've obviously done quite a few things right here in in their business strategy to get to where they are with that. So again, I think this comes back to what is it that AI is going to be good at, is going to be good at, at least right now, and where the indications may seem to be in the future, versus how do people actually think, make decisions, and things like that. There's a sales coach person on LinkedIn that I consume their content. I'm blanking on their name, but he talks about how what the best salespeople do actually is study evolutionary sociology and thinking about how did humans evolve, how did human behavior evolve, and what are we biologically primed to do, and you follow that thought process as a salesperson
Yeah.
in terms of those things. I have doubts AI is ever really going to be able to do that well because of, again, irrational human behavior and what we do. But it is going to be great for all kinds of amazing things and breakthroughs, especially in like medical research and things like that, where they can do so much task related work and lift off the shoulders of the researchers and come to all kinds of great advances there. That can then be taken and run by the human researchers and what it means long term for clinical trials. And there's all kinds of really great applications. I don't want to come across as someone who's anti AI. I am a skeptic in the sense that there's a lot that I don't think it will ever be able to do in terms of replacing what's important about human interaction and behavior.
Well, okay, so I did a post about this on X, and it's funny we're talking about this. So I'll share the screen again. I wasn't gonna cover this, but I think we're going down this kind of conversation path. So I had basically done a post saying, and it was about this whole conversation anyway. And so I said, one of my Rob Drumgold, shout out to Rob if you guys follow him on LinkedIn, but he said, I tell you, after test driving Grok 3, I wouldn't be shocked in the future. The future versions are better than people. We're not there yet, but we're close. So we're talking about this Klarna CEO, Klarna AI situation.
Yep.
I said, disagree. Empathy matters, and I think people underrate it. And then he said, AI will be able to fake it. Grok 3 already feels alive. Its humor is solid. It's getting close. And then I just did like a laugh. And then he asked Grok, will Grok be able to fake empathy in time? And the answer that he got was, as Grok, I'm designed to understand and respond to human emotions in a way that feels natural and helpful. During a vast amount of conversational data, I don't feel empathy in the human sense, which empathy, there's no human sense. It's empathy, it's to do with humans. But anyway, since I'm AI, I don't have emotions, but I can simulate it pretty convincingly by recognizing patterns in what people say and responding with an appropriate tone and content. Over time, advancements in an AI will, and assuming my creators keep tinkering with me, my ability to fake empathy will get even better, more nuanced, more context aware, more indistinguishable from casual interactions. But whether that's truly empathy or just a good imitation depends on how you define it. What do you think? Does it matter if it's faked as long as it feels genuine to you? And it's like, it's. I think what's funny about this is it's like, empathy is like when you feel the emotions that somebody else is feeling in a moment. And so it's not even the idea of it being faked. It's just like, I don't know if you can fake it even. I don't know, because you're just going to know that this is technology unless it gets to a point where you don't know if it's human or it's technology. But I have to believe that we will make laws that you have to say if this is AI or human. Like, I cannot see it. Otherwise, it's like, if you don't, we're going to have insanity because you're just going to have deep fakes running around saying things. Like, you have to have some kind of disclosure. So, I mean, that would be my thought, but it's just how important is that within, I mean, I feel like that even when I'm, just to be clear too, when I call a bank and they send me overseas, or I call AT&T and they send me overseas, that's a human, right? Like, obviously that's a human overseas, but it's like, I almost feel like a disconnect because it's like, oh, I'm overseas. And it's like some of these people, like, it does really seem like they care in some ways, but there's always a difference when it's, hey, when they're like, yeah, hey, I'm just in Kentucky, or hey, I'm just in area. Then I'm like, oh, like, you get it. Like, you kind of have an understanding of who I am just from location. So I'm like, I already feel that with customer service. And I feel like lots of people have been complaining about that for years. So then they even take it a step further with technology. I'm just like, part of customer service is like, I want the company to care enough about me to like put real time and investment into it and go, hey, I value as a customer, not go, oh, this is an expense we don't want to deal with. So scrap it. We'll just make technology deal with it,
Yeah, I know there's research into this being done. But it feels interesting to me, Joel, that we're at a point in history where we've never had more technology. We've never had more solutions to our problems, yet there's never been more depression. There's never been more mental health problems. And if you talk to just the average person, they feel more disconnected from the world around them than from ever, despite having every tool possible to feel more quote unquote connected.
Yep.
Some companies are trying to double down and try to mimic that to the people don't feel it, to the point of the article. I think, to your point, I think people on some level are going to know largely when they're interacting with a real person or not. They're going to feel that, because a lot of people have pretty good BS detectors as well, and knowing when someone's being genuine or not. And so if you're training your AI model on those things, I think long term people are going to know. That's why I think the long term, what's going to be good about AI and most helpful about AI actually has little to do with our day-to-day things. It's going to be more in the things of fields like research and stuff like that, where we're actually going to see the tremendous breakthroughs and the actual value for AI. It's not going to be in automating your customer service. It's not going to be in
Totally.
those kinds of things. That's not where the value proposition is going to be long term.
Yeah.
For AI and the opportunity, the good it's going to do.
Yeah. And I also
we'll see how things play out with this, but that's more my personal thought and feeling. That is not an organizational statement by any stretch from my company. With that, but that's just my thought process as I think about this, and I think about the rise of technology over the last 20-25 years, and how we've got all the latest and greatest tools and technologies to connect with people. Yet when you look at the surveys for most people have never felt more alone. People have never felt more depressed. Just in the day-to-day average person, regardless of where they live, whether if it's New York or the cornfields of Iowa. With that, it's the same with that. That's why my hot take here, Joel, is that thinking about over the next 15 years, it's kind of paradoxical in that the AI companies, the companies that are the most human over the next 10 to 15 years are actually going to be the ones that largely win.
Yeah.
The ones that win and become the most successful. It doesn't mean they're not also using AI to do tasks and get things done, but the ones that can touch on what makes people feel, and gets into their emotions and making that be the most human experience possible. That's my thought process on what the companies are going to be most successful over the next 10, 15, 20 years. That even as technology continues to accelerate, connecting people with what makes them human, and things related to that is actually what's going to drive most people's success.
100%. I mean, I could totally also see smaller companies. Like, I think we're going to see a rise of smaller companies that can be efficient. And I think what bigger companies are realizing right now is there are definitely a lot of tasks that are repetitive and are just, I think you mentioned it before we got on the show, but there's like these, maybe you did mention it on the show as well, but these tasks which don't require that much like extra thinking, right? Like it's just pure process. And a lot of these big companies are trying to reverse it. And the problem is with them reversing it is they have to cut thousands of people. Now, the downside to this is these are not just like employees. These are potential customers as well. And these customers all have a circle of influence, their family. So you think about it, if you're Meta and you just laid off 3,000 people, you just impacted potentially thousands more. And, like your dad gets laid off by Meta. The kid is not a fan of Meta. Okay. They don't like Meta because they're seeing parents, desperate or whatever the situation is. Like I remember my dad got laid off from an insurance company. I won't name the name of him, but I remember that because when it came to why are mom and dad having us move? Why is this happening? Oh, it was this company. It was a merger. I remember hearing merger, 5 years old. Like, what's that? Okay. And so is it winning now that I'm self-employed because I don't trust the system? It's because those things are ingrained. And I think what will happen is smaller companies as well will start to really like get founded and grab hold of these AI and realize that they can do a lot with less people. And that's when we start to get even in like fractional and gig economy. And so I think it's an exciting time. I think it's scariest in my mind for like really large companies because I think they are downplaying how important their employees, which are humans, are, and their customers, which are humans, are. And I always want to bet on humanity versus betting on technology from a company because it's like, humans at least right now are in control. And if AI becomes in control, then they're screwed as much as anyone else
Yeah.
anyway. So it's like,
Yeah.
anyway, that now
Yeah.
we're going down like the Matrix route, which is awesome.
Have you read Tribes by Seth Godin?
I have not, but I should check that out.
Yeah, you should check that out, and it's related to what you were just talking about, and it's basically the book was, this might be 15 years old now. I read it early in my career, but it's basically a thought process and idea that culturally we're shifting further and further away from essentially from large impersonal interactions, and we're gravitating towards more and more micro communities for where we get our thoughts, our opinions, like minds, and so we're behaving more and more and more like tribes of people that might intersect with different groups. You might be a part of 10 different tribes in terms of your personal life and work life. Like, for example, I would be part of the tribe that are black coffee snobs, where we believe that if you have good coffee and it's prepared right, you don't need sugar, you don't need cream, you don't need any of that stuff in it. It's great coffee. It's great coffee as it is, with that. But I think there is a movement also more towards that's continuing, where we're going to see more and more and more tribal behavior that harkens more back to that that sociological framework of how people in relationships have evolved over time. And what there were some changes with industrial revolution, rise of technology, but I think maybe on an unconscious level, the more and more plugged in we get to technology, the more and more we're realizing, hey, this is actually taking me away from
of course,
actual relationships, interaction, and what makes life worth living.
And you experience that as a parent, right? Like, as a parent, it's like one of the biggest, I know for me, one of the biggest challenges is I'm reminded daily from my wife of, like, her new thing is boundaries, boundaries, and it's boundaries with the cell phone. Like, are you choosing a phone over your children, And it's like, I hate to be that, like, anti-tech person in some ways, but I was never trained on that. Like, my parents didn't have cell phones when we were growing up. It came in like when in middle school. So a lot of these things are things that we're dealing with for the first time. And it was like, I think our parents a little bit had to deal with it. Like, oh, do we let our kids have a cell phone or not? No. But now it's like, it's not a cell phone, is it? It's like a supercomputer we're giving our kids. Like, it's an entertainment. It's a game. It's all these things. And we're having to make these decisions, but we're also having to kind of make the decisions for ourselves and like, go, okay, do I need to be more present? And then I think, we're not going to get to it today, but there is a there's a movement which 2 days from now. So this is February 26th, but in 2 days on February 28th, there's an organization that's trying to get people to stop buying from Amazon. And I think, I made a video about this saying like, I'm big on social media, but what happens if we all sign out of Meta, all sign out of Instagram? And I think in some ways, I think something like that needs to happen more so just for like people who are at the top of these companies to just realize like we matter as humans. Like, and it's something which like 20, 30 years ago, I still feel like a CEO of a company kind of had like a reasonable idea of like, hey, I got humans working for me. I want to treat them well. I honestly do not feel like the CEOs of today are in any way connected to normal, like, people. I just can't see it that way at all.
Yeah, there was an article I read recently that it was something, and I'm going to butcher the percentages here, but the idea will still come through that in most mid-sized or larger companies, mid-level managers are aware of roughly 70% of the problems experienced by their frontline employees. Senior leaders are aware of maybe 10% of the problems experienced by frontline employees, and CEOs and the C-suite, it's something like 4%.
Amazing.
Like, are aware of like 4% of the problems actually experienced by their frontline, which is a bit ironic considering it's the frontline people are the ones that actually move the needle for your organization and meeting.
So they
with your
didn't go on
customers.
Undercover Boss. That's what you're telling me.
No, no. So it's there's all kinds of things we could go on to go down with that. I'm skeptical of how much impact something like that can actually really have because of how good the social engineering has been from Amazon, from big tech, even from startup companies related to people's decision-making behavior. Like my wife and I are interested in, long-term in in going and living in Europe or going living in some other places internationally long term as a big life experience. I can tell you, and this is probably hypocritical of me to have this as part of the calculation, but one of the calculations we think about is, does Amazon deliver at, at where we're thinking about going? Because if we think about how convenient it is to tap a couple of keys into your phone and into the app and get something delivered that you need, so you don't have to leave your house and go to the store to do that. That is absolutely part of the decision making process of where we think about where we may want to live long term, and where we might want to do this. That's absolutely part of it, and that's absolutely factors into it. Paradoxically to that, what I think is also interesting is that for a lot of people that you talk to in that are longtime veterans in the tech space, and you get them to open a vein, this maybe more for people in the product management space, what a lot of them will tell you is that the longer that they're in kind of the tech product management space, the more that they just really want to move to Arkansas, open a micro farm, and just do nothing and be totally disconnected from the internet, from their phone, from other things, and have a small farm, raise horses or like cuddly animals and stuff, and they want to have nothing to do with the internet or tech long term.
Well, it's like if you work at a slaughterhouse,
which I find
right?
is interesting.
Yeah, well, it's like if you work at a slaughterhouse, it's going to be hard to go home and eat some meat after seeing something like that, right? If you see what goes on behind the scenes in the way that people are thinking, especially in tech. I mean, look, I think about that with social media all the time, and there was the one documentary that came out where it like pointed to a lot of these issues. And there was actually a time where I was really against social media because I thought it was just a waste of time. Then I started making money from it, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's not such a waste of time, but it's still something which like I want to be conscious for. I want to be conscious about what am I showing my kids and all these types of things. But look, we have had an awesome conversation. Definitely went down different routes than I was expecting, but these are helpful conversations. They're conversations about what's really going on. Daniel, where can people find out about you? Where can they find out about TripleTen? Where's the best place to reach you?
Best place to reach me is on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. You can reach out with a connection with me there. Best place to find out about TripleTen is to go onto our website, TripleTen.com, and find out about our programs, what we offer there, and do your homework and see whether or not, hey, this could be a good situation for me. We've got lots of customer testimonials on our website as well. Average, normal, everyday people who have made the transition and are working in technology now. So there's lots of great information out there to make assessments of, hey, is this something that I can see myself doing? Does this fit with what I see myself, what I want to do long term? Could this be part of my journey and path to getting there? Could be not. That answer is really up to you as the individual.
I love it. Well, guys, look, if you're looking to transition into tech, if you know someone that's looking to transition to tech, do me a favor, share this podcast with them, share Daniel's information, and check out TripleTen as well. If you made it this far in the podcast, well done. You're one of my loyal supporters. You're one of the 1,000 true fans. No, seriously, if you made it this far, amazing. If you want more resources of me, you can go to www.therealistrecruiter.com. We'll be back next week, of course, covering all the news in work, AI, tech, job search, everything in between. We'll have another great guest to be announced soon. And Daniel, thank you so much for spending 45 minutes with me on today, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Joel. Appreciate your time. Appreciate the audience's time. Have a great day, everybody. Be kind to yourself.
Amen. I love it.